Good afternoon, welcome. You're tuned into the Labor Forum here at WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. My name is Diane Mathowitz. I'm a retired auto worker. I worked for 30 years for General Motors on assembly lines. And my co-host, Paul McLennan, is right next to me here at the desk in the studio. Paul is a retired MARTA worker. He's a member of Amalgamated Transit Workers Union 732. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diane.
So we are excited. This is the last show now in March. The year is marching on, and we always want to make it very clear that we, as co-hosts of this program, truly enjoy doing this. We always learn so much ourselves from our guests, and we hope that this has been always is a valuable time for you to learn about the struggles of working people, not just here in Atlanta and Georgia, but around the world. And we thank you for tuning in, and we want to remind you, of course, that the opinions that are expressed on this program may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers at WRFG. We also want to make sure that you're aware that there are many ways for you to stay in touch with the Labor Forum. We have a website, wrfglaborforum.org. We've also got a Facebook page. We have the YouTube channel where you actually can watch us on air right now, and our guests every Monday. And you can actually go to the YouTube channel and see the programs later. They're archived there. And we, of course, have a Twitter. So there's many ways for you and us to converse and talk, and we hope that you take advantage of them. We're going to start right off with our Monday labor headlines, and then we'll go into Paul's labor history, which is always so informative. And I want to make sure you know that those are also available online. So in case you ever miss one, or there was something that you didn't quite hear, a date, a number, you always can access those as well. All right, here we go. Labor headlines for Monday, March 28th, 2016. The first story comes from Ireland. Veolia, the French-based global corporation, and its subsidiary, Transdev, is on the front pages in a dispute with workers who operate, I think it's pronounced Luas, light rail system in Dublin. Veolia and Transdev have been cited many times on the Labor Forum. Recently, we reported that after 2 years of intense struggle by the Boston School Bus Drivers Union, they successfully won the rehiring of 4 leaders fired by Veolia Transdev and the negotiation of an improved contract despite every dirty union-busting trick of that company. And we also reported that in Israel, after much pressure from the international boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement to demand the end of occupation of Palestine, Veolia ended its contract to supply Jewish-only bus service in the West Bank. But now to Ireland. The government there contracted with Transdev to run the public tram system known as Luas, and that contract runs until 2019. Irish workers have endured years of austerity, no wage increases, and higher living costs. The Luas workers have been in negotiations for months with the notorious union-busting company with little progress. When the proposed contract was brought before the membership, it was rejected by 99% of the drivers and 100% of the station staff. While the company spokespeople claimed that the raises outlined in the settlement totaled 18% over several years, the union has countered that at best it provides 10% for some, which is not enough to keep pace with inflation, and more importantly, reduces the pay for new hires and extends the amount of time to reach top pay from 10 years currently to 14. In addition, Transdev would extend the shift of drivers to 9.5 hours, change the required break times, and make it more difficult to arrange vacation and other leave time. The union has called for a series of 2-day shutdowns, including yesterday, Easter Sunday, and today, and 2 additional weekends in April. There is increasing movement for an all-out strike by these workers who are calling for solidarity. I first saw this information about this strike in Ireland from numerous Facebook posts by the Boston School Bus Drivers Union declaring their support. Now here to the United States, we have reported in the past on the struggle for worker safety and union rights at the huge Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi. Since 2005, the UAW, that's the United Auto Workers Union, has had a presence among the 6,000 workers, mostly African American, who have complained of multiple workplace issues, such as unsafe working conditions and poor medical treatment for those hurt on the job, the hiring of temp workers at lower pay and minimum benefits for extended periods of time without a pathway to permanent employment, as well as harassment and retaliatory discipline against pro-union workers. A coalition of students, faith leaders, community members, civil rights organizations, U.S. and international unions, elected officials, and well-known figures like Danny Glover have combined to hold rallies, press conferences, picket lines, and other protests to demand that Nissan allow a fair union election at the plant. Nissan, which is unionized at many of its other facilities around the world, has joined with other foreign-owned auto manufacturers in staunchly resisting unions in the U.S. South. Nissan received $263 million in tax breaks to build the plant in Canton, yet management continually threatens to shut it down if the workers vote union. On April 2nd, United Students Against Sweatshops, the Mississippi Student Justice Alliance, the National AFL-CIO, along with a host of other local, state, and national groups will be holding a rally in Canton to send the message, labor rights are civil rights. Sources say a union election could take place within the next 3 months. And finally, here in Atlanta, Farm Worker Awareness Week activities at Emory University started March 24th and go through March 31st. Right now, actually, at 4 p.m., a speaker from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is describing the life of a farm worker in this country. As longtime listeners of this program know, the CIW has achieved much progress in raising wages and improving working conditions for the many hundreds who pick tomatoes in Florida. With its creative and art-filled tactics and the use of consumer pressure, most of the fast food chains and some grocery stores have joined the Fair Food Program, which guarantees farm workers a voice on the job, a pay increase, and a way to improve their conditions. Unfortunately, the vast majority of farm workers, many of them who are immigrants, remain terribly exploited and oppressed. There are a few more public events scheduled at Emory to bring awareness and solidarity in support of farm worker rights. Tomorrow, Tuesday, March 29th, there will be an outdoor screening of the award-winning film Food Chains on the School of Medicine lawn at 6:30 p.m. People are encouraged to bring a blanket to sit on. On Wednesday, March 30th, a program on education and farm worker justice will take place at 7 p.m. at the Harlan Cinema, 605 Asbury Circle. And closing out the week on Thursday, March 31st, a concert with the famed hip-hop duo Rebel Diaz will be held at Cannon Chapel at 6:30 p.m. There is a Facebook event page with additional information. Thank you so much for paying attention to this week's labor headlines, and we'll move very quickly to Paul and This Week in Labor History.
Thanks, Diane. On this last week of Women's History Month, the Labor Forum recognizes Mary Elizabeth Bowser, born on March 30th, 1840. She was a highly regarded, free African-American woman who disguised herself as a slave and began acting as a spy for the Union Army. With a position among the slaves at the Confederate White House, Bowser became the highest placed and most important espionage agent in the Civil War. She was born a slave on a plantation near Richmond, Virginia, to owner John Van Lew, a hardware merchant. She was freed by Van Lew's abolitionist daughter Elizabeth and her mother after Van Lew's death in 1851. Mary Elizabeth stayed on with the Van Lew family as a servant. She got her education at an African-American Quaker school in Philadelphia where she developed a strong sense of Union patriotism and abolitionism. On her return, she married Wilson Bowser, a free black man, while she still worked at the Van Loo home. Despite her abolitionist sentiments, Elizabeth Van Loo was a prominent figure in Richmond. During the war, Van Loo helped manage a spy system in the Confederate capital, went regularly to the Libby prison with food and medicine, and helped escapees of all kinds, hiding them in a secret room in her mansion. Van Loo's most trusted and successful source for information was Mary Bowser. Van Loo urged a friend to take Bowser along to help out at functions held by the wife of the Confederate President, Jefferson Davis. Bowser was eventually hired full-time and worked in the Davis household until just before the end of the war. Bowser became Ellen Bond, a slow-thinking but able servant who was trained to act and seem invisible. Mary was able to obtain considerable information simply by doing her work. Since the Davises presumed that Bowser was uneducated, illiterate, and unintelligent, they spoke openly in her presence and took no care to conceal documents and letters concerning war strategy. Bowser used their racist assumptions to conceal her true identity as a conspiratorial mastermind. Bowser, who had a photographic memory, would memorize what she read and convey messages via code, such as by hanging wet laundry in certain patterns, or by speaking to Thomas McNiven, a baker who delivered to the Davis home and was also a member of the spy ring. Given his profession, McNiven was a hub for information. Visiting his bakery was an unexceptional destination for his agents, and McNiven was regularly out and about town, driving through Richmond, making deliveries. When he came to the Davis household, Mary could daily, without suspicion, greet him at his wagon, receive the delivery, and talk briefly. Bowser was the source of the most crucial information available. Everything she saw on the rebel president's desk, she passed on. By the last days of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis came to know that there was a leak in the house, and suspicion did fall on Mary. It is not known how or why, and she chose to flee in January 1865. Her last act as a Union spy and patriot was an attempt to burn down the Confederate White House, but this was not successful. After the war ended, the federal government, in an attempt to protect the post-war lives of its Southern spies, destroyed the records that could more precisely detail the information Bowser passed on throughout 1863 and 1864. The Bowser family rarely discussed her work, given Richmond's political climate. There is no record of Bowser's post-war life and no date for her death. She is among a number of African American women spies who worked on the Union side during the Civil War. Given the nature of the profession, we may never know how many women engaged in undercover spy operations, both planned and unplanned. Harriet Tubman is the most well-known, especially for her scouting expeditions in South Carolina and Florida that resulted in the freedom of hundreds of slaves. In 1995, the U.S. government honored Mary Elizabeth Bowser for her work in the Civil War with an induction into the Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. At the ceremony, she was recognized as having succeeded in a highly dangerous mission to the great benefit of the Union effort. She was one of the highest placed and most productive espionage agents of the Civil War. Her information greatly enhanced the Union's conduct of the war.
Wow, Paul, I don't ever know how you find all this stuff. So listeners, I hope you were as enthralled as I was in hearing about our sister Bowser and her spying. We're going to turn right now to a message from WRFG, and then we're bringing our first guest on, Rob Woods, who is here. He is with Georgia Equality, and in case any of you don't know, Governor Deal this morning at about 10 o'clock announced that he was going to be vetoing the much, controversial, hated, worrisome bill, so-called Religious Freedom Bill. And we'll be talking with I just blanked. We'll be talking with Rob in just a minute about what that all means. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Labor Forum here at WRFG 89.3 FM. As I mentioned right before the break, our guest in our 4:15 to 4:30 segment is Rob Woods. He is a senior field organizer with Georgia Equality. We originally had asked Rob to come on because we wanted to talk about the impact of this bill, which had so many names and numbers, but that did succeed in getting passed. And what it was impact would be on workers, because it essentially allowed a employer, if they held a deeply held religious belief, that they could fire people. So, but now, this morning at 10 o'clock, we're shifting our kind of conversation. We're going to ask Rob, how was it that it happened that Governor Deal decided to veto this bill?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to be on the Labor Forum. There were multiple interactions that created the conditions for the governor to veto the legislation, or as it said right now, that he says he's going to veto it, and we strongly believe it. I think the governor strongly took a look at the fact that oftentimes Georgia, even though it has a rough past, the fact that Georgia's been rated the best state in the nation to do business, and it would have been totally smeared due to that fact. In addition, there was a lot of pressure placed on the governor by corporations, in addition to organizations such as ourselves, Georgia Equality, and Georgia Unites Against Discrimination, which included a coalition of various groups. And then, more importantly, there were the people themselves that blew up the governor's phone line and just sent copious amounts of emails to let them know that this isn't needed in Georgia, and actually it would take Georgia back over 50 years.
Let me ask a question, because of course the incendiary point that was part of the legislation was that it was very clear that it was a response to the Supreme Court decision which legalized same-sex marriage. But when you read the bill, it essentially, in my opinion, made it clear that just a certain kind of Christian religion was the kind that was being protected, and that really other religions, for the most part, were either suspect or didn't have the same sort of standing. The idea that somebody can be fired or that somebody can be denied services because somehow my religion thinks they're sinners. So could you talk about that a little bit? Because it was kind of shocking. I found it very shocking.
Well, one of the points that I made while down in a place called Gordon, Georgia, I was speaking at the Georgia Association of Black Elected Officials, and I just come upon it where another legislator down there and I was saying, it is not good when the government defines a religion. And essentially, as they continue to kind of pull all of these bills together, they focused on religions that only would pretty much worship on Sundays and Saturdays. And there were conditions there in a certain bill before it got mashed into another bill. It would have excluded Islam. It would have it took a bad shot at Judaism and any other religion. So essentially, there most of the backings was behind the Georgia Baptist Association, and I'm not saying that to be mean or
because surely there were many Baptists who
exactly.
absolutely don't agree with it, because they all came and had press conferences.
Precisely, and it was a very small group of folks who, in my personal opinion, I'm thinking that perhaps you're seeing the later remnants of the Christian Coalition movement, where they're trying to continue to beat the drum. And the worst part about it is for them to be a quote-unquote religious organization, they spread a lot of misinformation to deceive other folks. And that's just totally uncharacteristic.
Yeah, because one of the things was, part of this bill, again, I just couldn't believe it, that, it said that no religious cleric could be forced to conduct a marriage ceremony amongst same-sex couples. Well, that's already the law.
Precisely.
And then it went so far to say that no individual could be forced to attend one. I thought, my goodness. Where did that come from? But anyway, so, all right, so here it is. As of this morning, it appears that for the moment, Georgians now can practice their religion. There shouldn't be discrimination, and we're moving on. So can you talk about whether we're going to move on?
Well, Georgia's going to move on. The question is, will the legislature move on? There have been legislators that have come out already to make two separate points. One, they want to override the governor's veto, and also they'll be back next year with more legislation. Senator Josh McCoon, who authored the Religious Freedom Bill last year, did an interview on WBUR up in Boston, in which he's saying that he'll be back. Usual suspects, usual crime. But the worst thing about it is the fact that it's the manner in which these issues are being politicized. The fact that the legislature would want to reconvene. There's a Senator Mike Crane out of Noonan who wants to reconvene the legislature, but he happens to be running for Congress. For the legislature to reconvene, it's $41,000 a day in per diem, in addition to having to pay for staffers and printing and all these other things. So it's more of a political move than anything else.
I had a question about, just in general, what we're seeing in the country today is a lot of hate and intolerance. Can you put what you saw this session in context in terms of what's happening, like in North Carolina, for example, and how this all seems to be part of an atmosphere that we're dealing with against people fighting for rights that have been won over years of fighting?
I see it as a very unfortunate situation. During the course of the weekend, I had an opportunity to see Congressman Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and how he discussed in his speech how he had been wrong on a lot of things, how he had demonized people, and now he's taken a step back and he was wrong. And that's absolutely what needs to happen in this nation now. A lot of folks know precisely what they're doing. They know that they're stirring the flames of racism and homophobia and sexism and all other type of isms that divide us. But if it gets them votes and is their path to their power source, then that's what they're going to do. And it's totally unfortunate. The solution is in my opinion, the solution is for legislators and congressmen and whomever, and particularly some of our quote-unquote presidential candidates, to lower that rhetoric. I mean, it has no place here.
We only have a couple of minutes left, Rob. I want to thank you for coming in. So there had been planned a rally to sort of encourage the governor to veto this bill for next week. So could you talk a little bit about how the character of this is changing?
Well, regardless of what the governor has done, we are still having that rally on April the 5th at noon at Liberty Plaza, which is directly across the street from the Capitol on the east side. We are encouraging everyone to come out. We want to thank the governor, but we also want to be able to thank the folks that supported the effort. We also want to make it clear that this is not over. This is only pretty much a breaking point with this legislative session. Where we have to go now is we've got to create and pass comprehensive civil rights legislation here in Georgia. and hate crime legislation here in Georgia. What was interesting is, to our surprise, a Republican legislator introduced a civil rights bill, but when there were other amendments attempted to be added that would include sexual orientation and gender identity, it was knocked down quickly, and then the bill itself never survived the crossover.
All right, so in the last 30 seconds that we have, Rob, if there are folks out there that want to get involved in this issue in a educational way, in a supportive way, how do they reach out to Georgia Equality or any of the other coalitions that help do this? And we have to comment, of course, that as you mentioned, there were literally hundreds of companies, employers, all different kinds, from businesses to movie to just all kinds of people who weighed in on this and really made it very clear that this was not something that was going to protect the workers who work for them, and that it was going to discourage people from getting employment with them. And that was, so because we're the labor forum, we really want to talk about the right of people to get a job and not to be harassed on it. So how do people get in touch with?
Well, first of all, please go to our website, www.georgiaunites.org. That's GeorgiaUnites, Uniting Georgia. That's where you'll get a lot of information about the rally and a lot of the activity that's been going on. If you're interested in finding out which corporations, which were over 500 corporations, major corporations, you want to go to GeorgiaProspers.org. And of course, you can always reach Georgia Equality at GeorgiaEquality.org, and you can actually reach out to me personally if you didn't grab this information. 404-523-3070. That's 404-523-3070.
Thanks so much, Rob, for coming in
Thank
and
you so
sharing
much
good
for having
news
me.
today.
Thank you so much for
And
having me.
we'll look forward to seeing you at the rally on the 5th.
Okay.
So folks, we have another message from WRFG, and our next guest is Greg Phan, and this is our continuing discussion about the Opportunity School District. Greg is here today representing the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, CBTU, and we're going to have an interesting conversation. Any of you who know Greg know that this will be an interesting conversation, so please stay tuned.